They say a crown weighs heaviest on the head that never expected to wear it. But what of the head that had a crown ripped away in the dead of night? Princess Elara Montclair learned that particular weight the moment steel-toed boots kicked open her chamber doors and soldiers dragged her through marble halls. She had walked since childhood, her silk nightgown trailing blood from scraped knees, her screams echoing off portraits of ancestors who could only stare in painted silence. The charges were treason, the evidence was manufactured, the sentence was exile or death, and Elara chose exile only because she knew something the court did not. Somewhere in the kingdom her father had built on lies, the truth was waiting to tear everything down. What she didn't know was that truth would have calloused hands, a crooked smile, and a forge that burned hotter than any royal hearth. What she couldn't have imagined was that the man who would save her life was the very person who could destroy her family's legacy forever. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start with the betrayal. The kingdom of Asterholm had known peace for 30 years under King Aldric Montclair, a peace bought with careful diplomacy, strategic marriages, and according to whispered rumors in taverns and brothels, a network of spies and assassins that made enemies disappear before they could become threats. Princess Elara, his only legitimate daughter, had been raised in gilded ignorance of such ugliness, tutored in languages and literature, trained in etiquette and embroidery, prepared for a political marriage that would cement alliances and produce heirs. At 23, she was considered beautiful in the classical sense. Dark hair that fell in waves to her waist, grey eyes that her mother had called storm-coloured, a figure that courtiers praised in sonnets she pretended not to hear. But beauty in a princess is currency, and Elara had long understood she was a coin waiting to be spent. What she hadn't understood was that some people preferred to destroy currency rather than spend it. The plot unravelled on a Tuesday, which Elara would later think was absurdly mundane for a life-destroying conspiracy. She had been summoned to the throne room under the pretense of discussing her upcoming betrothal to Lord Casimir Thornwick, a northern duke whose lands bordered the hostile territories of the Frostvale Mountains. The marriage had been her father's idea, a way to secure the northern border and gain access to Thornwick's legendary iron mines. Elara had met Casimir twice. He had cold blue eyes and colder hands, and when he looked at her, she felt assessed and catalogued like livestock. But princesses did not marry for love, they married for kingdoms. She entered the throne room in a gown of deep blue velvet, her hair braided with silver thread, playing the role she had been born into. King Aldric sat on his throne of black oak and steel, his beard more grey than black now, his shoulders slightly stooped in a way she hadn't noticed before. To his right stood Lord Casimir, immaculate in black and silver. To his left stood Chancellor Morwen, the king's chief adviser, a serpent of a man whose smile never reached his eyes. And surrounding them, more guards than usual, hands resting on sword hilts. Elara's first clue that something was wrong came when her father wouldn't meet her eyes. Princess Elara Montclair, Chancellor Morwen's voice slithered across the marble floor. You stand accused of conspiracy against the crown, of plotting with foreign agents to overthrow your father's rightful rule and install yourself as queen with Lord Thornwick as your consort. The words made so little sense that Elara actually laughed. That's absurd. I've never... We have letters, Morwen continued smoothly, producing a sheaf of parchment from his robes. Written in your hand, sealed with your personal seal, detailing plans to poison the king during the autumn festival and frame his death as natural causes brought on by his failing health. I wrote no such, father! Elara turned to the king, desperate. You can't possibly believe this. I would never... King Aldric finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes broke something fundamental inside her chest. Not anger, not betrayal, but resignation. the look of a man who had already made his choice and found it bitter but necessary. "The evidence is substantial," he said, his voice heavy. "The handwriting experts have confirmed the letters are yours. Your personal maid has testified that you met secretly with foreign envoys. Your own seal was used. I would have your defense, daughter, but make it compelling." Elara's mind raced. Her handwriting, her seal, her maid, all of it impossible, all of it meticulously constructed to destroy her. But by whom and why? The answer came when she caught Lord Casimir watching her with something like satisfaction in his cold eyes, and Chancellor Morwen's thin lips curved in the ghost of a smile. She understood then, with the clarity of absolute disaster. The marriage was never meant to happen. Casimir wanted the throne itself, not a wife to share it with. And Morwen, ambitious Morwen, who had served her father for 20 years, while quietly resenting every moment of service, wanted the power that came with advising a puppet king. Together, they had crafted the perfect trap. Eliminate the legitimate heir, frame her as a traitor, and in the chaos that followed her execution, position Casimir to marry one of the younger princesses, or perhaps claim the throne through some manufactured lineage. Her father, growing older and more tired, would be malleable. The kingdom would be theirs, brilliant, ruthless, and she had walked right into it. "Father," she said quietly, abandoning desperation for dignity, "if I am to die, at least let it be honestly. I am being framed. Lord Casimir and Chancellor Morwen have orchestrated this to remove me from the line of succession. Think, please. When have I ever shown ambition for the throne? When have I ever defied your will? This is a coup disguised as justice." For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in the king's eyes. Doubt? Hope? But Morwen was faster. "Precisely what a guilty party would claim," the Chancellor said smoothly. "My Lord King, I understand this is painful. She is your daughter, but the evidence speaks clearly. And need I remind you that mercy shown to traitors only encourages more treason? The law is clear. The penalty for conspiracy against the crown is death or exile," Elara said quickly. "The law allows for exile." The throne room fell silent. Lord Casimir's eyes narrowed. He wanted her dead, wanted the certainty that she could never return to challenge whatever arrangement he and Morwen had planned. But to argue for her death too strongly would reveal his hand. King Aldrich rose from his throne, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. "Exile, then. You will be stripped of your title, your lands, your rights. You will be escorted to the southern border before dawn and released with nothing but the clothes on your back. If you ever return to Asterholm, the sentence will be death. Do you understand?" Elara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to nod. "I understand." "Take her to the tower," the king said, his voice cracking. "Let her gather what small personal items she may carry. She leaves at midnight." The guards moved forward, and Elara didn't resist as they gripped her arms. As they led her from the throne room, she glanced back once. Her father had collapsed back onto his throne, his face buried in his hands. Chancellor Morwen was already leaning close to whisper in his ear, poison disguised as counsel, and Lord Casimir watched her go with cold satisfaction, already counting his victory. The tower room where they imprisoned her was, ironically, the same room where she had been born 23 years earlier. Her mother screaming through hours of labor before dying 3 days later from fever. Elara sat on the narrow bed and tried to think through the rage and fear clouding her mind. She had perhaps 6 hours before the guards returned, 6 hours to plan, 6 hours to survive. She had no allies in the castle. Morwen had been too thorough. Any servant who spoke for her would be suspect. Any noble who defended her would be implicated. She was alone, but she was not without resources. Elara moved to the small chest at the foot of the bed and pulled out her traveling cloak. then felt along the hem until she found the hidden pocket her mother's old maid had sewn there years ago. Inside was a small leather pouch containing 20 gold crowns, a fortune to a peasant, barely enough for a princess accustomed to luxury, but it would keep her alive. She tucked the pouch into her bodice, then searched the room for anything else useful. A small knife used for cutting threads, a tinder box, a silver locket containing a miniature portrait of her mother. Not much, but it would have to be enough. Midnight came with the sound of boots on stone steps. The guards entered without ceremony, professionals doing an unpleasant job efficiently. They marched her down through the castle's back passages, away from the main halls where courtiers might see and ask questions, through the kitchens, still warm from the evening's cooking, through the servants' quarters, where frightened eyes peered from doorways before quickly retreating, through the postern gate and into the night. A covered wagon waited, pulled by 2 horses. They shoved her into the back without gentleness, and the wagon lurched forward. Elara pulled back the canvas covering, just enough to watch her home disappear into the darkness, the castle's towers black against the starlit sky. 23 years of life, gone in a single night. The journey to the southern border took 3 days. The guard spoke little, fed her stale bread and water, and made it clear that any attempt to escape would be met with violence. Elara stayed quiet, watched the landscape change from cultivated farmland to wild forest, and planned. Because exile was not an ending. Exile was an opportunity. If she could survive, if she could find proof of the conspiracy, if she could somehow return and expose Morwen and Casimir before they consolidated their power. If. The wagon stopped at dawn on the 4th day at a crossroads, deep in the Thornwood forest, miles from any village. The guards untied her bonds, pulled her from the wagon, and one of them, a grizzled sergeant with a scar across his nose, spoke for the first time. "You got 2 choices, Princess. That road goes east to the free cities. Might make it if you're lucky and don't get eaten by wolves or bandits. That road goes south to the waste. Nobody comes back from the waste. North and west go back to Asterholm, which means death. Choose wisely." Then they climbed back onto the wagon and left her standing alone in her silk nightgown and travelling cloak, 20 gold crowns in her bodice, a small knife in her hand, and absolutely no idea how to survive in the wilderness. She chose east because at least east had the possibility of civilization, and started walking. 3 hours later, as the sun climbed toward noon and her feet bled through the silk slippers that had never been designed for walking on rough roads, Elara admitted to herself that she was going to die. Not immediately, perhaps, but soon. She had no food, no water, no skills for surviving in the forest, and when night came, the wolves the guard had mentioned would find her. She had been a fool to choose exile over a quick death. At least an execution would have been dignified. She collapsed at the base of an old oak tree and let herself cry for the first time since her arrest. Not pretty, delicate tears, but ugly, choking sobs that racked her whole body. She cried for her lost life, her murdered future, her father's weakness, her own helplessness. She cried until she had no more tears, and then she sat in numb silence, waiting for whatever would come. What came was the sound of whistling. Elara's head snapped up. Through the trees, she could see a figure approaching on the road, pushing a small handcart. As he drew closer, she could make out details. A man, young, perhaps late 20s, wearing a leather apron over a simple homespun shirt and breeches. His arms were bare and heavily muscled, his hands scarred and calloused. His hair was dark and unruly, his face angular with a jaw that suggested either stubbornness or determination. He whistled a tune she didn't recognize, cheerful and completely out of place in the wilderness. He stopped when he saw her, his whistle dying mid-note. For a long moment they stared at each other, princess and commoner, measuring threat levels. Well, he said finally, his voice deeper than she expected, that's not something you see every day. A lady in silk, sitting under a tree bleeding on the road to nowhere. You lost or running? Both, Elara said, surprised by her own honesty. Mostly dying, I think. He set down his handcart and approached cautiously, like someone approaching a wounded animal that might bite. Up close, she revised her estimate of his age. Younger than she'd thought, maybe 25, with dark eyes that held intelligence and humor in equal measure. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, white against tanned skin. You don't look like you belong out here, he observed, crouching to examine her feet with professional detachment. These slippers aren't meant for walking. Your feet are a mess. Where are you headed? The free cities, I suppose. Anywhere that isn't here. That's 3 days' walk through wilderness. You got food, water, weapons besides that tiny knife? No. Friends or family waiting for you in the free cities? No. He sat back on his heels, studying her face now. She watched recognition dawn slowly in his eyes, followed by wariness. You're the princess, the one they say committed treason. I heard about it in the village 2 days ago. They're saying you tried to kill the king. Elara's hand tightened on her small knife. Are you going to turn me in? I imagine there's a reward. There is, he agreed. 500 gold crowns for information leading to your capture should you try to return to Asterholm. But you're not going back, are you? You're going forward. And I don't turn in bleeding women for coin, even treasonous princesses. I didn't commit treason, she said quietly. I was framed. That's what all innocent people say. It's also what all guilty people say, rather useless as proof either way. He laughed, a genuine sound that startled her. Fair enough. Look, Princess, Elara, I'm not a princess anymore. Look, Elara, you've got maybe 6 hours before exposure and dehydration turns serious. By tomorrow, if you're still out here, you'll be dead or worse. I've got a forge about 2 miles south of here, just off the main road. Small place, but there's food, water, a spare room. You can rest there, get proper clothes and boots, then decide what you want to do. No strings, no expectations, just basic human decency. It was probably a trap. He was probably going to rob her or worse. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, and accepting help from a stranger was the kind of mistake that got exiled princesses killed or sold into slavery. But her feet were bleeding, her throat was dust dry, and the alternative was sitting under this oak tree until the wolves came. Why would you help me? She asked. He stood, offering his hand. Because someone helped me once when I needed it. Because you look like you've had the worst week of your life, and because 500 gold crowns aren't worth the weight of letting someone die when I could have saved them. Plus, I've always wanted to know what a princess looks like up close. Turns out you bleed and cry just like regular people, humanizing. Despite everything, Elara felt the corner of her mouth twitch. You're very strange. I'm a blacksmith living alone in the woods. Strange comes with the territory. So what do you say? Take a chance on the strange blacksmith or stay here and become wolf food? Elara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. His grip was strong and warm, his palm rough with the calluses of hard work. I don't even know your name. Kieran, he said. Kieran Ash. Welcome to the worst decision you'll probably make today, Your Highness. Just Elara, she corrected. Just Elara, then. Come on, let's get you somewhere safe before you fall apart completely. He loaded her onto his handcart with surprising gentleness, pushing aside various tools and metal pieces to make room. Then he picked up the handles and started pulling, his muscles straining but managing the weight. As they traveled down a narrow path that branched off the main road, Elara found herself studying him, a blacksmith, a commoner. Her father would have been horrified at the idea of his daughter accepting help from such a person, let alone riding on his cart like cargo. The thought gave her a strange, bitter satisfaction. The forge appeared through the trees like something from a peasant's tale. A low stone building with a steeply pitched roof, smoke curling from a chimney, a water wheel turning lazily in a nearby stream. Behind it sat a smaller wooden structure that must be living quarters. The sound of metal on metal rang through the clearing, then stopped as they approached. A boy of perhaps 14 emerged from the forge, wiping soot-stained hands on his apron. He froze when he saw Elara. "Kieran, who is that?" "This is Elara. She'll be staying in the spare room for a few days while she recovers from her travels. Elara, this is Finn, my apprentice. Finn, go fetch water from the well and heat it for a bath, and find those old clothes from the village charity basket, something that might fit a woman." Finn's eyes went wide. "That's the princess, the one who needs help," Kieran interrupted firmly. "Go on, water, clothes, now." The boy scurried off, casting backward glances that mixed fear and fascination. Kieran helped Elara down from the cart and into the small house, which consisted of a single main room serving as kitchen, dining area, and workspace, with 2 doors leading to what must be bedrooms. It was clean but sparse, furnished with handmade furniture that showed skill if not artistry. A fire burned in the hearth, and the smell of bread baking filled the air. "Spare room is through there," Kieran said, pointing to one of the doors. "I'll have Finn bring in the bath and water. Rest, eat. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." "Why are you doing this?" Elara asked again, needing to understand. "If you're caught harboring me, it's treason. They'll execute you." Kieran met her eyes steadily. "Then I suppose we'd better make sure they don't catch us." Over the following days, Elara discovered that survival involved considerably more discomfort and considerably less dignity than she had ever imagined. The spare room was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a chest. The bath Finn brought was lukewarm at best. The clothes from the charity basket were rough wool that itched against skin accustomed to silk. But she had shelter, food, and safety, which was more than she'd had standing alone on that road. She also had questions. Many questions about Kieran, who worked his forge from dawn until dusk, creating horseshoes and nails and simple tools with focused intensity. About Finn, who watched her with wary curiosity and jumped at sudden noises. About why a skilled blacksmith would choose to live alone in the woods rather than in a prosperous village or town where his work would be more lucrative. But she didn't ask them, because she understood that accepting help didn't grant her the right to invade privacy. So instead, she made herself useful in small ways. She couldn't work a forge or handle heavy tools, but she could organize the chaos of Kieran's household, could mend clothes, could cook the simple meals he and Finn had been living on. It gave her purpose, when purpose was the only thing keeping despair at bay. A week passed, then 2. The bleeding stopped on her feet, though the scars remained, permanent reminders of her fall from grace. Her hands, which had never done more than hold embroidery needles, developed their own calluses from handling wood for the fire and drawing water from the well. Her body, which had been maintained through careful diet and limited exercise appropriate for a lady, grew stronger from physical labor, and slowly, carefully, she began to talk with Kieran during the evenings when work was done and Finn was asleep. Cautious conversations at first, circling each other like diplomats at a negotiation. He told her about his work, the satisfaction of taking raw metal and shaping it into something useful. She told him about court life, the suffocating etiquette and endless games of social manipulation. He told her about losing his parents to plague when he was Finn's age, about surviving through determination and the kindness of a master blacksmith who took him as apprentice. She told him about her mother dying in childbirth, about being raised by distant tutors and a father who loved her but never quite knew what to do with a daughter. Neither of them spoke about the deeper things, about why he lived in isolation, about her plans for revenge or justice, or whatever she could salvage from the wreckage of her life. but the conversations built something between them. Trust, perhaps, or at least the foundation of it. It was during the third week that Finn accidentally let slip the information that changed everything. They were sitting around the rough wooden table, eating the rabbit stew Elara had learned to make, when Finn started chattering about the upcoming village festival. "They say Lord Thornwick himself might attend," the boy said excitedly. "He's been spending a lot of time in the south lately, meeting with the regional lords. My cousin says he's trying to build support for something big. Maybe a campaign against the mountain raiders." Elara's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. "Lord Thornwick is in the south. I thought he never left his northern estates." "He's been traveling the kingdom for the past month," Finn said through a mouthful of bread, "since right after the princess, since the princess was exiled. People say he's going to marry one of the younger princesses and become king consort eventually." Elara set down her spoon carefully, her appetite gone. "I see." Kieran was watching her with those dark, perceptive eyes. "Finn, go check the forge. Make sure we banked the fires properly." "But I already—" "Go." The boy left, and silence settled over the table like heavy snow. "You're planning something," Kieran said finally. "I can see it in your face, something dangerous and probably stupid." "I'm planning to survive," Elara said carefully. "Casimir, Lord Thornwick, he orchestrated my exile with Chancellor Morwen. They framed me to remove me from the line of succession. If he's traveling the kingdom building support, it means he's positioning himself to take more power. My younger half-sisters are children, 8 and 10 years old. If he marries one of them, he controls the kingdom through a child bride," Kieran finished. "And your father?" "My father is old and tired and has always relied too much on his advisors. If Morwen and Casimir work together, they'll control him completely, or eliminate him once he's no longer useful. And you want to stop them. I want to expose them. I want justice. I want—" She stopped, surprised by the fury in her own voice. "I want them to pay for what they did to me, to my life, to everything I was supposed to be." Kieran leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Revenge, then." "Justice," she corrected. "Revenge disguised as justice. I'm not judging, just naming it honestly. The question is, how do you plan to achieve it? You're a disgraced exile with no proof, no allies, and no way to even get close to the people who destroyed you." "I don't know yet," Elara admitted, "but I'll find a way. I have to." "Why? Why risk everything when you could just leave, go to the free cities, start a new life, be safe?" She met his eyes. "Would you? If someone destroyed everything you'd built, stole your future, and was planning to hurt people you cared about, would you just walk away?" Something shifted in his expression, something dark and old. "No," he said quietly. "No, I wouldn't." "Then you understand." He was quiet for a long moment, his scarred hands flat on the table. Then he sighed, a sound of resignation and decision mixed together. "All right. If you're going to be stupid and suicidal about this, you should at least be prepared. Tomorrow we start training." "Training for what?" "Survival, fighting. Everything a disgraced princess needs to know if she's going to challenge the people who framed her. Can't have you dying before you get your revenge. Justice, whatever you're calling it." "Why would you help me with this?" Kieran smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because someone helped me once when I needed it. And because watching corrupt nobles get what they deserve sounds like an excellent way to spend the autumn." The training was brutal. Kieran woke her before dawn and worked her until her muscles screamed and her hands bled from gripping the practice sword he fashioned from weighted wood. He taught her footwork and balance, how to move efficiently without wasting energy. He taught her the dirty tricks of street fighting, how to fight someone bigger and stronger by using their weight against them. He taught her to use her size advantage. Being smaller meant being faster, harder to hit, able to slip through defenses. "Forget everything you know about honor and fair fighting," he said one morning after she'd complained about a particularly vicious elbow strike. "Honor gets you killed. Fair fighting is for tournaments and noble games. Real fighting is about surviving and winning in that order. If you go after Casimir and Morwen, they won't fight fair. Neither can you." Between training sessions, she studied. Kieran had a small collection of books, surprisingly sophisticated for a rural blacksmith. Histories, political treatises, a few technical manuals on metallurgy. She read them all, absorbing information about power structures and political manipulation, looking for patterns and weaknesses. And in the evenings, she and Kieran talked, really talked, the kind of conversations she'd never had at court, where every word was weighed for political advantage. He told her about his philosophy of craftsmanship, the satisfaction of creating something permanent in a transient world. She told him about her dreams of being more than just a political pawn, of maybe running a school or traveling to distant lands. They argued about everything: politics, religion, the nature of justice, whether the kingdom's rigid class system served any useful purpose. "You really believe commoners are equal to nobles?" Kieran asked one night, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I believe people are equal in their essential humanity," Elara said carefully. "The accident of birth doesn't make someone inherently better or worse, just luckier or less lucky in circumstances. Your father wouldn't agree." "My father has many blind spots, including apparently the ability to tell when his daughter is being framed for treason." "You're still angry at him?" "I'm furious at him. He chose political convenience over me. He looked at fabricated evidence and chose to believe it, rather than trust his own daughter. That betrayal." She stopped, her throat tight. "That might hurt worse than anything Casimir or Morwen did." Kieran reached across the space between them and took her hand. The gesture was simple, supportive, nothing romantic about it, but the warmth of human contact, the solidarity of someone who understood, nearly broke her composure. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I believe you. About the treason, about being framed, about all of it. You're a lot of things, Elara, but you're not a traitor to people you love." It was the first time anyone had said they believed her. She held onto his hand like a lifeline and tried not to cry. Autumn deepened into early winter. Word from the outside world filtered through occasionally via travelers who stopped at the forge for repairs. King Aldrich had taken ill, a mysterious ailment that left him weak and confused. Lord Casimir had been appointed as temporary regent until the king recovered. Chancellor Morwen had proposed new laws restricting the rights of minor nobility and consolidating power in the central court. The younger princesses had been sent to a remote convent for their protection and education. Every piece of news confirmed what Elara had suspected. Casimir and Morwen were moving quickly to consolidate their coup. Her exile had been just the first step. Now they were systematically removing all potential opposition and concentrating power. "I need to go back," she told Kieran one cold morning as they worked through sword drills in the clearing behind the forge. "I need to find proof of what they did, expose them before they complete their takeover." "You need an army," Kieran countered, blocking her strike easily, "or at least allies. You can't storm the castle alone and demand justice. They'll kill you on sight. Then I'll be subtle, infiltrate, gather evidence. I grew up in that castle, Kieran. I know passages and secrets they've forgotten about. Except you're the most wanted exile in the kingdom. Someone will recognize you." "Not if I'm careful. Not if I'm disguised properly. I can—" Kieran's practice sword cracked against hers, hard enough to numb her hands, and she stumbled backward. He advanced, his face serious. "You want to know the real problem with your plan? It's not the risk or the difficulty or even the probable death. It's that you're doing it alone. You don't trust anyone enough to ask for help." "I trust you," Elara said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Do you? Because you haven't asked me to come with you. You haven't asked Finn, who would follow you into hell if you asked nicely. You haven't even considered trying to find other allies who might help. You're so used to being betrayed that you assume everyone will betray you." The accusation stung because it was true. She lowered her practice sword, suddenly exhausted. "What do you want me to say? That I'm scared to trust anyone else? That every time I think about building a plan that involves other people, I remember my father's face when he chose to believe manufactured evidence over me? That trusting people is what got me exiled in the first place?" "Yes," Kieran said simply. "Say all of that. Be honest about it. Then decide if you're going to let fear control you or if you're going to take a risk on the possibility that not everyone is like the people who betrayed you." They stood in the cold morning air, breath misting between them. Elara felt something shift in her chest, a wall she'd built crumbling slightly. "All right," she said quietly. "Will you help me? Will you come with me when I go back to face them?" Kieran's expression softened. "Yes, I'll help you. Not because I think it's smart or safe or likely to succeed, but because you deserve justice and because watching you go alone feels like a betrayal of everything I've tried to teach you about fighting smart instead of fighting alone." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. First, we need to make an actual plan instead of a suicide mission disguised as nobility. Second, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you weeks ago but kept putting off because—" He stopped, looking uncomfortable for the first time since she'd known him. "Because it changes things." Elara felt a flutter of unease in her stomach. "What is it?" Kieran set down his practice sword and sat on a fallen log, gesturing for her to join him. When she did, he took a deep breath as if steeling himself. "My full name is Kieran Ash Montclair." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "Montclair, that's your family name?" "Yes." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "King Aldrich is my father too. Different mothers, obviously. Mine was a servant in the castle, a laundry woman named Mary Ash. She got pregnant by the young prince 26 years ago, before he married your mother. When his father, the old king, found out, he gave her money to disappear and stay quiet about the child. She took it, moved to a village south of here, raised me alone until the plague took her." Elara's mind was reeling. "You're my half-brother." "Illegitimate half-brother," Kieran corrected. "No claim to the throne, no rights, no recognition. Just another bastard the royal family paid to stay hidden and forgotten. I didn't even know who my father was until my mother told me on her deathbed. She made me promise never to seek him out, never to try to claim anything from him. Said it would only bring trouble. How long have you known who I was?" "From the moment I saw you on that road. Your face has been on coins and banners for years. I recognized you immediately. And I helped you anyway because—" He finally met her eyes. "Because you're my sister, because family should mean something more than political convenience or carefully maintained secrets, because if I turned away someone who needed help just to protect myself, I'd be no better than the father who paid to pretend I didn't exist." Elara processed this, turning it over in her mind from different angles. Shock gave way to a strange kind of understanding, pieces clicking together. The education visible in Kieran's speech, his knowledge of court politics, the way he'd so easily believed her story of being framed, the books in his house, including a historical text about royal succession laws. "You said you'd always wanted to know what a princess looked like up close," she said slowly. "That was a lie. That was deflection. I'm good at those." "Does Finn know?" "No one knows except you now. And my mother, but she's been dead 9 years. Why tell me?" Kieran stood, pacing the clearing restlessly. "Because if we're going to do this, if we're going to infiltrate the castle and expose Casimir and Morwen, you need to know what cards we're actually holding. My bloodline might not give me legal rights, but it gives me something else. Leverage. If we can prove I'm Aldrich's son, it complicates their narrative. It adds another player to the board they didn't account for. It also makes you a target, Elara said. If they know you exist, if they think you might challenge their plans, they'll try to kill me. Yes, I'm aware. He stopped pacing, turned to face her fully. But here's the thing, Elara. I've spent my entire life being nobody. The forgotten bastard, the blacksmith in the woods, the son who was paid to disappear. And I was fine with that mostly. I built a good life. I have my craft, my forge, my freedom. But then you showed up, bleeding and desperate and refusing to just lie down and die, and something in me woke up. Maybe it's stupid, maybe it's selfish, but I want to matter. I want to make the people who decided I wasn't worth acknowledging understand that they made a mistake. I want them to see what the son they threw away became. The raw honesty in his voice made Elara's chest ache. She stood, moved closer to him. You already matter, Kieran. To Finn, who worships you. To the people who come to your forge for honest work. To me, for everything you've done these past months. I know, but it's not enough anymore. Can you understand that? She thought of her own burning need for vindication, for justice, for the world to see the truth of what had been done to her. Yes, she said quietly, I understand perfectly. They stood close in the cold morning, two discarded children of the same father, united by anger and determination, and something deeper that neither wanted to name yet. Then Kieran smiled, his crooked smile that transformed his serious face into something lighter. Well then, sister, shall we plan the downfall of some corrupt nobles? Let's, Elara agreed. The planning took weeks. They couldn't just storm into the castle and demand justice. They needed evidence, allies, and a strategy that accounted for the fact that Casimir and Morwen controlled the guards, the court, and increasingly the king himself. They needed to be smarter, more patient, more ruthless than their enemies. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Finn. The boy had been unusually quiet one evening, pushing food around his plate instead of eating with his usual enthusiasm. Finally, he blurted out, I know you're planning something dangerous. I know you're going to leave and try to fight the people who hurt you, and I want to help. Kieran started to refuse, but Elara held up a hand. What kind of help did you have in mind? Finn straightened, clearly having prepared this speech. I have a cousin who works in the castle kitchens. She's part of the staff that serves the royal family directly. If you need someone to get information, to plant something, to spy on what Casimir and Morwen are doing, she could help. She's smart and she hates them anyway, because they cut the servants' pay and increased their hours. Why would she help us? Kieran asked skeptically. Because I'll ask her. And because... Finn hesitated, then pushed forward. Because everyone in the servants' quarters knows the princess was framed. The guards who arrested you, they bragged about it afterward in the taverns, said it was all a setup, that Morwen paid them to testify about secret meetings that never happened. The servants know. They just can't say anything without risking their own lives. Elara felt something stir in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or at least the possibility of it. Finn, if your cousin helps us and gets caught, they'll execute her. You understand that? I understand. But she deserves the choice, doesn't she, to fight back or stay silent? He's right, Kieran said quietly. We can't protect everyone from risk. We can only offer them the choice to join us or not. So Finn was dispatched to the castle with a carefully coded message for his cousin, and they waited. 3 days of anxious tension passed before the boy returned with news that made Elara's heart race. She'll help, Finn reported, practically vibrating with excitement. And she says there's already a resistance forming among the servants and lower nobles, people who know something's wrong but are too scared to act alone. She says if you can give them a reason to hope, a plan that might actually work, they'll support you. How many people? Elara asked. She doesn't know exactly. Maybe 30 or 40 who can be trusted completely, more who would probably help if they thought there was a real chance of success. It wasn't an army, but it was more than nothing. It was possibility. Over the following weeks, they built a network. Finn's cousin, whose name was Mira, became their primary contact inside the castle. She passed information out through a complicated chain of messengers, what Casimir and Morwen were planning, where documents were kept, which guards were loyal to the crown versus the conspirators. Each piece of information was valuable, but what they really needed was proof. Hard evidence that would be undeniable even to King Aldrich in his weakened state. The letters they used to frame you, Mira reported through Finn. They're still in Chancellor Morwen's private office. He keeps them as insurance, in case he ever needs to produce evidence again. If you could get those letters, maybe find proof they were forged. Breaking into the Chancellor's office would be suicide, Kieran said flatly. It's in the most secure part of the castle, surrounded by guards loyal to Morwen. Unless you had someone to create a distraction, Elara mused. Something big enough to draw away most of the guards. A fire, perhaps, or a public confrontation, Kieran finished. Someone showing up and making accusations loud enough that everyone has to respond. Someone they can't ignore. They looked at each other, the plan forming between them without words. You, Elara said. You reveal yourself as Aldrich's son. Publicly. Dramatically, with enough people watching that Morwen and Casimir can't make you disappear quietly. While they're dealing with that crisis, I slip in and find the evidence. It's risky. Everything is risky, but this might actually work. They refined the plan obsessively, accounting for every variable they could imagine. Timing was crucial. They needed a public event where the entire court would be assembled, where Kieran's revelation would have maximum impact. Mira reported that a winter festival was planned for the week before the solstice, a celebration where even common petitioners could bring grievances before the king. It was tradition, one that even Casimir and Morwen couldn't ignore without raising suspicion. That gave them 3 weeks to prepare. Elara trained harder than ever, pushing her body to its limits. She would need to move fast once inside the castle, needed to fight if cornered, needed to be ready for anything. Kieran worked his forge late into each night, creating tools they might need. Lockpicks disguised as hairpins, a small knife that could be hidden in a boot, smoke bombs that could create confusion. And in the quiet moments between preparation, something shifted between them. It started innocently enough, Kieran teaching Elara to work the forge, his hands guiding hers as they shaped hot metal together. The casual touches became less casual. The conversations that stretched late into the night became more intimate. The space between them when they sat together became smaller. Neither of them acknowledged it directly. There were more important things to focus on, and anyway, what future could a disgraced exile and an illegitimate bastard have together? But Elara found herself watching the way firelight played across Kieran's face when he worked. Found herself memorizing the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine. Found herself imagining what might be possible if they survived what was coming. One night, a week before they were scheduled to leave for the capital, Kieran found her standing outside in the snow, unable to sleep. He draped a blanket around her shoulders without speaking, and they stood together watching the stars. "Are you scared?" he asked eventually. "Terrified," Elara admitted, "not of dying exactly, but of failing, of getting people hurt who trusted me, of looking my father in the eye again and seeing nothing there but a stranger. He's a complicated man, our father. Weak in some ways, strong in others. He loved you, I think, in his limited fashion. He just loved his kingdom more. Did you ever hate him for abandoning you?" Kieran considered. "Sometimes. When I was young and didn't understand why I couldn't have a father like other children, but my mother taught me that bitterness is just anger with nowhere to go. She said the best revenge against people who underestimate you is to build a life so good they regret missing out on knowing you. So that's what I tried to do. She sounds wise. She was. Practical, tough, kind. You would have liked her. He paused. She would have liked you too. Would have admired your spine. Elara turned to face him, the blanket slipping slightly. Kieran, when this is over, if we survive, what happens then? I don't know. I haven't let myself think that far ahead. Think now, please. He met her eyes, and in the starlight she saw vulnerability there, a hope he was afraid to voice. I think, he said carefully, that maybe we could build something together. Not a kingdom or a grand destiny, just a life. Here, or somewhere else, or wherever we want. A blacksmith and an exile, making their own rules. That sounds like a fairy tale. Maybe. But fairy tales have to start somewhere, don't they? He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers gentle. I know the timing is terrible. I know we should be focused on survival and justice and all the practical things. But Elara, I need you to know that these months with you have been important. You're important. To me. She closed the distance between them, rising on her toes to kiss him. It was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But Kieran answered by pulling her closer, one hand cradling her face, the kiss deepening into something that felt like promise and desperation mixed together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elara rested her forehead against his. We're going to survive this, she said fiercely. Both of us. We're going to expose those bastards, save the kingdom, and then we're going to build that life you talked about, understand? Yes, ma'am, Kieran said with a smile. Whatever you say, Your Highness. Just Elara, she corrected as she always did. Just Elara, he agreed, and kissed her again. The journey to the capital took 4 days by wagon, travelling roads Elara had once known well from royal processions. Everything looked different now, smaller somehow, less impressive. Or perhaps she had simply changed, grown beyond the girl who had taken such things for granted. She wore peasant clothing and a hood that shadowed her face, travelling as Kieran's wife, while Finn played the role of their son. It was a thin disguise, but enough to avoid immediate recognition. They arrived 2 days before the festival, taking rooms at a modest inn on the edge of the craftsman's quarter. Mira met them there after dark, a young woman with sharp eyes and the cautious manner of someone who had survived by being invisible. Everything's ready, she reported quietly. The petition has been filed in your name, Kieran Ash, claiming lineage and requesting an audience with the king. It's already causing whispers. Some of the older servants remember your mother, remember the rumours. Morwen is worried, though he's trying to hide it. And Casimir, Elara asked. Angry, he wanted to have you arrested immediately, but that would have drawn too much attention to why he cares about a random blacksmith's petition. He's planning something, though. Be careful tomorrow. What about my access to Morwen's office? Mira handed her a folded paper, map of the back corridors. I've marked which guards can be bribed and which can't. The office door has 2 locks, but I borrowed an impression of the keys. Your lockpicks should work if they're well made. They are, Kieran assured her. One more thing, Mira said hesitantly. The king. He's not well, Lady Elara. Whatever illness he has, it's getting worse. Some days he doesn't recognize people he's known for years. Some days he seems lucid but exhausted. If you're hoping he'll suddenly become the father you remember and defend you... I'm not, Elara said firmly. I'm past hoping for rescue. We rescue ourselves, or no one does. The festival dawned cold and clear, the kind of winter day where the sun shines but provides no warmth. Elara watched from the inn window as crowds began gathering at the castle gates. Petitioners and merchants and common folk come to celebrate and air grievances. In a few hours, Kieran would walk through those gates and set everything in motion. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, sending out a prayer to any gods who might be listening. "Second thoughts?" Kieran asked from behind her. "Constant thoughts. But no, not second thoughts about this." She turned. "You remember the plan? Wait until the petition session is in full swing. Approach the throne. Present my case with enough evidence to be credible, but not enough that Morwen can immediately disprove it. Make it dramatic. Give you 30 minutes to get in and out of Morwen's office." He smiled tightly. "Simple. Nothing about this is simple. Kieran, if things go wrong, they won't. But if they do, if you need to run, don't wait for me. Save yourself, please." He crossed the room, took both her hands in his. "Not a chance. We go in together. We come out together. That was always the plan. You're impossibly stubborn. I learned from the best." He kissed her forehead. "It's going to work, Elara. We've prepared for every contingency. We have allies. We have a plan. We have each other. That's more than most rebellions start with. This isn't a rebellion. It's justice. Call it whatever helps you sleep at night." An hour later, they stood at the castle gates with dozens of other petitioners. Elara kept her hood up, her face angled down, every instinct screaming that someone would recognize her. But the guards barely glanced at the ragged crowd, checking for weapons but not identities. They passed through into the courtyard, and Elara felt the weight of memory pressing down. These stones, these walls. She had walked here 1,000 times as a different person in a different life. The great hall was packed with nobles and common folk alike, a rare mixing of classes that tradition demanded, but everyone endured with visible discomfort. At the far end, raised on a dais, sat King Aldrich on his throne. Even from a distance, Elara could see how much he had declined. Shoulders stooped, face gaunt, hands trembling slightly. To his right stood Chancellor Morwen, vulture-like and vigilant. To his left, Lord Casimir in black and silver, every inch the regent in waiting. The petition sessions proceeded with bureaucratic slowness, a farmer complaining about unfair taxes, a merchant disputing a trade license, a widow seeking compensation for her husband's death in military service. Each petitioner approached the throne, stated their case, received judgment or deferral. The nobles on the dais looked bored. The common folk in the crowd looked resigned. Then Kieran stepped forward. "I am Kieran Ash," he said, his voice carrying across the hall with surprising power. "Blacksmith of the Thornwood, I come before this court to petition for recognition of my birthright." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Recognition petitions were rare, usually handled quietly through lawyers and bribes. Public claims were either desperate or dangerous. Chancellor Morwen leaned forward. "State your claim clearly, blacksmith." Kieran pulled out a folded document, yellowed with age. "This is a letter written by Mary Ash, my mother, on her deathbed 9 years ago. In it, she swears that I am the son of King Aldrich Montclair, conceived 26 years ago when she served in the castle laundry. She was paid to leave quietly and never speak of it. I have kept her secret until now, but recent events in this kingdom have convinced me that silence is no longer acceptable." The hall erupted, nobles shouting denials, commoners craning for a better look, guards moving forward uncertainly. On the throne, King Aldrich had gone very still, his face unreadable. It was working. Every eye in the hall was fixed on Kieran, which meant Elara could slip away unnoticed. She moved through the crowd like a shadow, heading for the corridor Mira had marked on the map, past the guards distracted by the commotion, through the servants' passages she had played in as a child, up the back stairs to the administrative wing where Chancellor Morwen kept his office. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs, but her hands were steady as she pulled out the lockpicks Kieran had made. The first lock clicked open easily. The second was more stubborn. taking precious minutes while she listened for approaching footsteps. Finally it gave, and she slipped inside. Morwen's office was obsessively organized, every document filed with rigid precision. Elara moved quickly to the large cabinet against the far wall, the one Mira had described. Locked, of course, but a simple lock that yielded to her picks. Inside were rows of files, each labeled in Morwen's spidery handwriting. There, a file marked Montclair Succession, Secure. Inside were the forged letters that had destroyed her life. She recognized the handwriting because it was almost hers, close enough to fool anyone who didn't know her writing intimately. She recognized the seal because it was her seal, which had gone missing weeks before her arrest. And underneath the letters was something even more damning. Payment records. Morwen had paid a forger named Silas Blackwood 500 gold crowns to create the letters. He had paid Elara's personal maid 200 crowns for her false testimony. He had paid the handwriting experts 300 crowns each to confirm the forgery as genuine. A complete paper trail of the conspiracy. Elara's hands shook as she gathered the documents, evidence, proof, everything they needed to expose. The door opened behind her. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Chancellor Morwen said mildly. Elara spun, papers clutched to her chest. Morwen stood in the doorway alone, regarding her with something like satisfaction. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience, Princess. Or should I say exile? Running away, surviving when you should have died in the wilderness, and now this pathetic attempt at vindication." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate this? That I wouldn't have countermeasures in place? These documents prove you framed me," Elara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You paid for false evidence. You orchestrated the entire conspiracy. Documents that you stole by breaking into my private office. Documents that could easily be dismissed as forgeries created by a desperate exile seeking revenge. Who will they believe, Elara? The trusted chancellor who has served this kingdom faithfully for decades, or the disgraced traitor who was caught red-handed with evidence of theft?" He was right, and Elara felt her certainty crumble. Even with proof, Morwen controlled the narrative. He could spin this any way he wanted. "But here's what I propose," Morwen continued, moving closer. "You give me those documents. You disappear quietly, perhaps take a ship to the free cities where you can live out your life in anonymity. And in exchange, I don't have you executed. I'll even ensure your bastard brother isn't harmed. Kieran, isn't it? The unexpected complication currently making a spectacle of himself in the Great Hall. Yes, I know all about your alliance. Did you think you were being clever? Why frame me?" Elara asked, stalling for time, mind racing for options. "Why not just have me killed quietly?" "Because your death would have raised questions. Exile based on treason was clean, legal, impossible to challenge. And it removed you without turning you into a martyr. Plus, it gave Casimir the opening he needed to position himself as regent. Really, it was quite elegant. My father. Your father is a dying old man who trusts me completely. By spring, he'll be dead. Casimir will marry one of your simpering half-sisters, and I'll run this kingdom from behind the throne where real power has always resided. Your existence doesn't matter, Elara. You're a footnote in history. Take my offer and live, or refuse and become nothing at all." Elara looked at the papers in her hands, then at Morwen's confident face. He expected her to crumble, to take the easy way out. He had calculated everything, planned for every contingency. Except one. "No," she said clearly. Morwen's expression darkened. "Then you've chosen death. Guards!" But before he could shout again, Elara threw one of Kieran's smoke bombs at the floor. It exploded in a choking cloud, filling the office instantly. She burst through the smoke toward the door, slamming into Morwen and sending him staggering. Into the corridor, documents still clutched tight, running as boots thundered behind her. She couldn't go back to the Great Hall. That would lead guards straight to Kieran. Couldn't go out the main entrance. Had to find another way. A hand shot out from a side corridor, yanking her off her feet. Elara gasped, ready to fight, then saw Mira's frightened face. "This way! Quickly!" They ran through a maze of servants' passages, Mira moving with the confidence of someone who had spent years navigating these hidden spaces. Behind them, shouts echoed as guards searched. They ducked into a laundry room, hiding behind hanging sheets as Boots passed by the door. "Did you get it?" Mira whispered. Elara nodded, still clutching the papers. "Then we need to get you to the Great Hall. Kieran's still there, still making his case. If you can present that evidence publicly, in front of all those witnesses, Morwen can't suppress it. There are guards everywhere. I'll never make it. You will if I help." Mira pulled off her servant's apron, handed it to Elara. "Put this on, hood down, head up. You're just another servant moving through the halls. Walk like you belong. I'll be right beside you." It was insane. But so was everything else they'd done. Elara tied on the apron, straightened her spine, and stepped back into the corridor with Mira at her side. They moved through the castle with deliberate casualness, just two servants going about their duties. Guards passed them without a second glance. Nobles didn't see them at all. Servants were invisible in their world. The Great Hall was still in chaos when they reached it. Kieran was in heated debate with Morwen's deputy chancellor, presenting his mother's letter, demanding recognition. King Aldric looked confused and overwhelmed. Lord Casimir looked furious. The crowd was riveted, common folk delighting in the spectacle of nobles being challenged. Elara and Mira slipped along the wall, moving closer to the dais. Just a few more steps. Just a little closer. Then someone grabbed Elara's arm. She turned to find a guard staring at her face, recognition dawning. You're the princess." She drove her elbow into his throat before he could finish, a move Kieran had taught her. The guard went down choking, and suddenly everyone was looking at her. The entire hall frozen in a moment of collective shock. Elara yanked off the servant's apron and hood, letting her dark hair fall free. Met her father's eyes across the distance. "Hello, Father," she said clearly. "I've come home." The hall erupted into absolute chaos. Guards surged forward. Nobles shouted. Common folk pressed closer for a better view. On the dais, King Aldric half rose from his throne, his face a mask of confusion and something that might have been hope. "Seize her!" Casimir roared. "She's a traitor and exile. Guards now!" "I'm a daughter who was framed," Elara countered, her voice ringing through the hall. She held up the documents, making sure everyone could see them. "And I have proof. Chancellor Morwen forged the evidence used to exile me. He paid for false testimony. He orchestrated a conspiracy to remove me from the line of succession so Lord Casimir could take power through a child bride marriage. And I can prove all of it." The guards had stopped advancing, caught between conflicting orders. The crowd was pressing forward, hungry for the truth. And on the throne, King Aldric was staring at her with the first hint of clarity she'd seen in his eyes. "Let her speak," the king said hoarsely. "If she has evidence, let her present it." "My lord, she's a known liar," Morwen started, but Aldric cut him off with a gesture. "Let her speak." Elara climbed onto a table, making herself visible to the entire hall. Her hands shook as she held up the first document. "This is a payment ledger from Chancellor Morwen's private funds. It shows 500 gold crowns paid to Silas Blackwood, a known forger, 2 weeks before my arrest. Those coins bought the letters that were used as evidence of my treason." She held up another paper. "This is a receipt for 200 gold crowns paid to my former personal maid, Cecilia. That was her price for lying about meetings that never happened." "Those could be forgeries themselves," Casimir shouted, "created by a desperate exile. Then let us examine them," Elara shot back. "Let us bring in Silas Blackwood and Cecilia and ask them under oath what they were paid for." Let us bring in independent handwriting experts to examine both the original treason letters and these payment records. Let us investigate properly instead of rushing to judgment based on convenient evidence." "The girl has a point," someone in the crowd called. Others murmured agreement. The nobles on the dais looked uncomfortable. This was spiraling out of control. Kieran had moved closer during the confusion, positioning himself between Elara and the guards. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear. "There's more," he said. "I came here today claiming to be King Aldric's illegitimate son. I have my mother's testimony, but I also have this." He pulled something from his pocket, held it up. A ring, simple but distinctive. "This was given to my mother by a young prince 26 years ago. It bears the personal sigil of the royal family, not the official seal, but the private mark used by family members. My mother kept it hidden her entire life. I'm offering it now as evidence that, yes, I am who I claim to be." King Aldric's face had gone very pale. "That ring! I remember that ring. I gave it to Mary." The admission hung in the air. Morwen looked stricken. Casimir looked murderous. And the crowd, the beautiful, unpredictable crowd, began to cheer. Because this was better than any festival entertainment. This was real drama, real scandal, involving the highest levels of power. This was the kind of story that would be told in taverns for generations. "We have 2 petitions before this court," Elara said, pressing their advantage. "First, that Kieran Ash be recognized as King Aldric's son. Second, that the charges against me be reinvestigated given this evidence of Chancellor Morwen's corruption. I submit that both petitions deserve fair consideration, not summary dismissal, unless the Crown prefers to look like it's hiding something." It was a calculated risk, appealing to the king's pride and the crowd's sense of justice simultaneously. Aldric might be weak and confused, but he was still king, and even a weak king had pride. King Aldric rose from his throne, and the hall fell silent. He looked old and tired and lost, but there was something in his eyes that reminded Elara of the father she'd known as a child, before politics and power had complicated everything. "Chancellor Morwen," he said quietly, "are these allegations true? Did you pay for false evidence against my daughter?" Morwen's face was a mask of composure, but Elara saw the calculation behind his eyes. He was weighing his options, deciding whether to fight or retreat. "My lord, I acted in what I believed were the kingdom's best interests," he began, which was as good as a confession. "That's not what I asked. Did you forge evidence?" A pause. Then, "Yes." The hall erupted again, nobles shouting accusations, common folk calling for justice, guards looking uncertain about who they should be protecting. It was beautiful chaos, the kind that toppled corrupt regimes and rewrote history. Lord Casimir saw it too, saw his carefully constructed coup collapsing in real time, and desperate men do desperate things. "Guards!" he roared. "Arrest everyone! The exile, the bastard, the chancellor, they're all conspiring against the crown. Do your duty!" Some guards moved to obey, others hesitated. The hall divided into factions in seconds, nobles choosing sides, commoners pressing forward, violence suddenly imminent. Then a voice rang out, strong and clear despite its age. "Enough!" King Aldric had drawn the ceremonial sword that hung beside his throne, not a weapon meant for combat, but a symbol of royal authority. He held it high, and something in the gesture commanded attention. "I am still king," Aldric said into the sudden silence. "Not you, Casimir, not you, Morwen, me. And as king, I will decide what justice looks like in this hall." He turned to Elara, and she saw tears in his eyes. "My daughter, what was done to you was unconscionable. I failed you. I chose political convenience over truth, and I will regret that failure until my dying day. But if you're willing, I would like to try to make amends." Elara's throat closed up. This was the moment she'd imagined during months of exile, the vindication she'd craved. But now that it was here, it felt more complicated than triumph. Because her father was dying and he was sorry, and she was still so angry but also so tired of being angry. "I'm willing," she said quietly, "but I need more than apologies. I need action." "Then you shall have it. Chancellor Morwen, you are hereby stripped of your position and placed under arrest pending a full investigation. Lord Casimir, your regency is revoked. You will return to your northern estates and remain there until summoned. Princess Elara, you are restored to your titles and rights with my profound apologies. And Kieran." The king looked at his illegitimate son with an expression Elara couldn't quite read. Regret, wonder, fear. "I don't know what to say to you," Aldrich admitted. "I abandoned you and your mother. I was young and scared and chose duty over honor. I'm sorry seems inadequate, but if you're willing, I would like to know you, to perhaps build something from this mess I've made." Kieran was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled slightly. "I'd like that, Father." The word hung in the air like a prayer and a challenge. In the end, it took 3 days to sort everything out. Chancellor Morwen was imprisoned pending trial. Lord Casimir fled during the night rather than face house arrest, taking his loyal guards and disappearing into the Northern Territories. The forger Silas Blackwood was found and confessed everything. The payment trail was verified by independent auditors. And slowly, painfully, the truth came out. Morwen had been planning the coup for years, building his network, compromising nobles, preparing for the moment when he could seize real power. Casimir had been a willing partner, ambitious and ruthless enough to see the opportunity. Together, they had orchestrated Elara's exile as the first step in a larger plan to reshape the kingdom under their control. They had failed. But the damage they'd caused would take years to fully repair. Elara spent those 3 days in an odd limbo, restored to her rooms in the castle but feeling like a stranger in her own home. Everything looked the same, but she had changed too much to fit comfortably into her old life. She was no longer the naive princess who had taken her privilege for granted. She was harder now, more aware of how easily power could corrupt, how fragile justice was. And she was in love with a blacksmith who was now technically a prince. Kieran handled his sudden legitimacy with the same practical calm he brought to everything. When nobles tried to flatter him, he remained polite but distant. When courtiers attempted to teach him proper etiquette, he learned what was necessary and ignored the rest. He was himself, unapologetically, and somehow that made people respect him more. "I'm not cut out for court life," he told Elara one evening as they walked the castle gardens in the snow. "All the politicking and posturing, I'd go mad within a month." "Me too," Elara admitted. "I thought I wanted my old life back, but now that I have it, I realize I've outgrown it. I don't belong here anymore. So what do we do?" She stopped walking, turned to face him. "We leave together. We go back to your forge or somewhere else entirely. We build that life you talked about under the stars. No crowns, no courts, just us. Your father needs you. The kingdom needs you, especially now with Casimir gone and Morwen imprisoned. Your half-sisters are children. Someone has to—" "Someone will. But it doesn't have to be me. Not anymore." She took his hands. "I've done what I came to do. I exposed the corruption, saved my father from his advisor's manipulation, proved my innocence. But staying here, playing princess again, that's not who I am anymore. Maybe it never really was." Kieran searched her face. "You're sure? Because once we walk away from this, there's no taking it back. You'd be giving up a throne, a kingdom, everything most people dream of." "I'm sure. I've spent months learning what actually matters to me, and it's not power or status. It's freedom, purpose, love, she smiled. It's you, you stubborn blacksmith. I'm choosing you and whatever life we can build together. Even if that life involves early mornings at a forge and simple meals and none of the luxury you grew up with. Especially then. He kissed her soft and deep, a promise sealed in the falling snow. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. There is one thing I need to do first, though, Elara said, before we can leave with clear consciences. The conversation with King Aldrich was one of the hardest things Elara had ever done. They met in his private chambers, just the two of them, father and daughter, trying to bridge a chasm of hurt and betrayal. I'm not staying, she told him directly. I'm abdicating my claim to the throne. Kieran and I are leaving to build our own life away from court politics. Aldrich had aged 10 years in 3 days. He looked frail, sitting in his chair by the fire, a blanket over his knees despite the room's warmth. But his mind was clearer than it had been in months, as if the shock of recent events had burned away some of the fog. I understand, he said quietly. I don't like it, but I understand. You deserve to choose your own path after I tried to choose it for you and nearly got you killed. I'm not doing this to punish you. I know. You're doing it because you've discovered who you really are, and that person doesn't fit in a crown anymore. He smiled sadly. I'm proud of you, you know, for surviving, for fighting back, for refusing to let them destroy you. You're stronger than I ever was. You were strong when it mattered, Elara said. You listened to the truth when you could have chosen comfortable lies. You made things right even though it cost you your most trusted advisors. That takes courage. Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like too little, too late. I should have known you weren't capable of treason, should have investigated more carefully before exiling my own daughter, should have been a better father, a better king. His hands trembled on the armrests. I'm dying, Elara. The physicians say I have perhaps a year left, maybe less, and I'll die knowing I failed you when you needed me most. Elara knelt beside his chair, took one of his trembling hands in both of hers. You're human. You made mistakes, but you also gave me the space to become who I needed to be. If you'd protected me from everything, kept me safe in gilded rooms, I never would have learned to fight, never would have found Kieran, never would have discovered my own strength. So maybe your failure was actually a strange kind of gift. That's a generous interpretation. It's the truth. I'm not saying it didn't hurt. It did. It still does sometimes, but I survived it and I'm better for it and I forgive you. Can that be enough? Aldrich's eyes filled with tears. It's more than I deserve. They talked for another hour, filling in the gaps of the months they'd lost, sharing stories and making what peace they could. When Elara finally left, she felt lighter somehow, as if she'd set down a burden she hadn't fully realized she was carrying. The official abdication ceremony was brief and surprisingly informal. Elara signed documents renouncing her claim to the throne, witnessed by the remaining trustworthy nobles and recorded by the royal scribes. There was debate about succession, with some arguing Kieran should be considered given his legitimate bloodline, but he declined even faster than Elara had. I'm a blacksmith, he said simply. Not a king. Find someone else. In the end, they appointed a council of regents to rule until the younger princesses came of age, with carefully written laws preventing any single member from accumulating too much power. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than what Morwen and Casimir had planned. The kingdom would survive. It would even perhaps improve. Mira was rewarded for her bravery with a position as head of household staff and a significant increase in wages. Finn, who had proven himself invaluable during the conspiracy, was offered a position as apprentice to the royal blacksmith, but he chose to return with Kieran and Elara instead. Someone's got to keep you two out of trouble, he said with a grin. They left on a cold morning in early winter, the three of them in a wagon loaded with tools and supplies. The castle staff turned out to see them off, servants and a few sympathetic nobles waving farewell. King Aldrich watched from his chamber window, too weak to come down, but present in his own way. As they passed through the castle gates for what might be the last time, Elara didn't look back. She kept her eyes forward, on the road ahead, on the future she and Kieran would build together. "Any regrets?" Kieran asked, as the castle disappeared behind them. "None," Elara said firmly. "You? Only that we didn't have more time to spend together before all the drama. Would have been nice to have a normal courtship, maybe some romantic dinners, without the threat of execution hanging over us. We'll make up for it. We have the rest of our lives now." "The rest of our lives," Kieran repeated, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." They settled back into life at the forge with surprising ease. Elara continued her training, growing skilled enough with the sword that Kieran occasionally let her win their sparring matches without having to try too hard. She also discovered an aptitude for metalwork, finding satisfaction in the process of heating and shaping iron into useful forms. Together, they expanded the forge's reputation, taking on more complex commissions from surrounding villages. But more than the work, it was the peace they built together. Mornings spent in comfortable silence, working side by side, evenings discussing philosophy and politics and dreams for the future. Nights curled together in their small house, listening to rain on the roof or wind through the trees. It was simple and it was perfect, and it was theirs. Word reached them periodically from the capital. King Aldrich died that spring, peacefully in his sleep, his greatest regret that he couldn't see his daughters grow into their full potential. The Council of Regents was functioning adequately, if not brilliantly. Casimir had been spotted in the Northern Territories building a small army, and there were rumors he might attempt to retake the throne by force, but so far nothing had materialized. Chancellor Morwen stood trial, was convicted of conspiracy and treason, and was executed. Elara felt nothing when she heard about Morwen's death. Not satisfaction, not grief, just a distant acknowledgement that justice had been served and the chapter was closed. "Is it strange that I don't care?" she asked Kieran one evening. "I spent so long wanting them to pay for what they did to me, and now that Morwen's dead and Casimir's in exile, I just don't feel anything." "It's not strange. Revenge only matters when you're powerless. Now you have a life you actually want. You don't need vindication anymore because you've already won." "Have I?" He gestured around their small house, at the forge visible through the window, at the life they'd built. "You're free. You're loved. You're doing work that matters to you. You wake up every day and choose how to spend your time instead of having it dictated by duty and protocol. If that's not winning, I don't know what is." She kissed him, slow and sweet. "When did you become so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just finally noticed." They married that summer in a simple ceremony in the village, with Finn as witness and half the local population in attendance. No nobles, no politics, no grand spectacle, just two people promising to build a life together, witnessed by community and bound by love. Elara wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Kieran wore his best shirt and actually combed his hair. They exchanged rings Kieran had forged in his own workshop, simple bands of silver that would bear the marks of their shared work. The village celebrated with them, grateful for the blacksmith and his wife, who had brought such excellent craftsmanship and fair dealing to the region. They threw a festival that lasted 3 days, with dancing and drinking and more food than anyone could reasonably eat. Elara found herself laughing until her sides hurt, dancing until her feet ached, feeling more joy than she'd ever experienced in all her years as a princess. "Happy?" Kieran asked as they finally stumbled home in the early hours of the 4th day. "Deliriously," Elara said, "though I may never dance again. My feet are staging a rebellion. Ironic, given your history with rebellions. That's terrible. You're terrible. Why did I marry you? Because I'm charming and handsome and excellent with my hands? The last part, definitely. The first two are debatable. He laughed and swept her up, carrying her over the threshold of their home in the traditional manner. She shrieked and clung to his neck, and they both nearly fell over in the doorway, but somehow they made it inside. He set her down gently, and they stood together in the darkness of their small house, catching their breath. "Elara Montclair Ashe," Kieran said softly. "My wife, my partner, the most stubborn, brave, infuriating woman I've ever met. I love you beyond reason." "Uday Kieran Ashe Montclair," she replied. "My husband, my brother in blood and partner in everything else. The man who saved my life by offering me shelter when I had nothing. I love you more than I thought possible." They made love that night with the tenderness of new marriage and the passion of people who had fought too hard to reach this moment. Afterward, lying tangled together in their small bed, Elara felt a completeness she'd never known in her old life. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not a throne or a crown or political power, but simple human connection. Love earned rather than arranged. Partnership chosen rather than forced. "Do you ever miss it?" Kieran asked drowsily. "The castle, the luxury, being royalty." "Sometimes," Elara admitted. "I miss having a large library. I miss baths that don't require hauling buckets of water. I miss... Actually, no, that's about it. Everything else about that life was either boring or terrifying, or both. This is better. We're better. We really are." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. Two discarded children of a king who had found something better than kingdoms. They found home. Years passed, the forge prospered. Finn grew into a skilled blacksmith in his own right and eventually left to start his own workshop in a larger town, promising to visit often and actually keeping that promise. Elara and Kieran's reputation spread, bringing commissions from across the region. They hired apprentices, taught them not just metalwork, but the ethics of honest craft and fair dealing. They also became quietly involved in underground efforts to reform the kingdom's more unjust laws. Using contacts from their time at court and Elara's understanding of how power actually worked, they helped organize a network of progressive nobles and educated commoners pushing for change. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would bring attention or danger, just steady pressure toward a more equitable society. "We're still fighting the system," Kieran observed one night as they reviewed coded messages about proposed reforms to hereditary land laws. "Just in a different way." "Is that a problem?" "No, I like it actually. Feels more effective than grand gestures and dramatic confrontations. Slow change is still change." Elara smiled. "Look at us. Reformed princess and acknowledged bastard, secretly working to undermine the very power structures that created us." "It's a good life," Kieran agreed. And it was. Through seasons and years, through challenges and triumphs, through the small joys and inevitable sorrows of any life well lived, they built something that mattered. Not a dynasty or a legend, but a partnership. A family, when children eventually came. A legacy measured not in crowns or conquered territories, but in the lives they touched and the example they set. Sometimes travelers would come through, spreading news from the capital. The young princesses were growing into wise and compassionate rulers. The Council of Regents had actually managed to implement meaningful reforms. Casimir had died of fever in his northern exile, his ambitions unfulfilled and unmourned. The kingdom was finding its way towards something better, slowly and imperfectly, but genuinely. And in a forge at the edge of the Thornwood, a blacksmith and his wife continued their quiet work, shaping metal and shaping lives, content with what they had built together. One spring evening, 15 years after they'd left the capital, Elara stood in the doorway of their workshop, watching Kieran work. His hair was touched with grey now, his hands even more scarred from years of labour, but he moved with the same focused intensity she'd first noticed all those years ago. Their children, 2 girls and a boy, played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the wind. This was her kingdom now, not lands or titles or political power, but this, family, purpose, love earned and given freely. She had been a princess once, had worn silk and jewels and walked marble halls. But she had become so much more by walking away from all of that. Kieran looked up, caught her watching and smiled, that crooked smile that still made her heart skip. "Admiring the craftsmanship?" "Always," she said, walking over to kiss him, despite the soot on his face, "though I was actually thinking about how far we've come, from that road where you found me to here. Sometimes it feels like a dream. If it's a dream, I never want to wake up. You won't have to. This is real." "We made it real." He set down his hammer, pulled her close despite her laughing protests about getting dirty. "The scorned princess and the forgotten blacksmith. Who would have thought?" "I did," Elara said firmly. "From the moment you offered me shelter without knowing if I'd bring you trouble, I knew you were special, knew we could be special together." "Well, you were right, as usual. It's infuriating how often you're right. Someone has to be. You certainly aren't." "No, hey now." She kissed him to stop the protest, deep and sweet and full of promise. 15 years married and she still felt butterflies. Their children groaned dramatically from the yard, making exaggerated gagging noises at their parents' display of affection. Elara and Kieran broke apart, laughing. "Come on," Kieran said, taking her hand. "Let's go embarrass our children further by being adorably in love at dinner. Best plan you've had all day." They walked together toward their house, toward the family they'd built, toward the life they'd chosen. Behind them, the forge fires burned steady and warm. Above them, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. And around them, the forest sang with evening birdsong, a soundtrack to their happiness. Elara had been many things in her life: princess, exile, rebel, wife, mother. But of all the roles she'd played, the one she valued most was simply this, herself. Fully, authentically, without apology or compromise. The girl who had been dragged from her bed and cast out of her home had died in that wilderness. In her place had risen a woman who knew her own strength, who chose her own path, who built her own kingdom from love and work and uncompromising honesty. And that woman, walking hand in hand with the blacksmith who had saved her life and won her heart, lived happily ever after. Not because everything was perfect, life was never perfect, but because they had each other, and they had chosen each other, and that choice, renewed every day, was more valuable than any crown. The conspiracy that had tried to destroy Princess Elara Montclair had failed. Not because she'd defeated it through military might or political maneuvering, though she'd done both, but because she'd refused to let it define her. She'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into the catalyst for her best life. And in a forge at the edge of the Thornwood, where the sound of hammer on anvil rang like music and children's laughter filled the air, she proved something important: that power isn't found in thrones or titles, but in the courage to choose your own destiny, that love freely given is worth more than any arranged alliance, that sometimes the best revenge against those who try to destroy you is simply to build something beautiful from the ashes they left behind. The scorned princess found her love in a blacksmith, and together they forged something stronger than any kingdom, a life worth living on their own terms, with their own rules. They exposed the corruption of the court, not through violence or vengeance, but by refusing to play by the corrupted rules. They won by walking away and building something better. And they lived, truly lived, every day after. Thanks for watching this incredible story. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. Here at Heartfelt Storytime, you have new, beautiful stories every day. Don't miss out. See you next time.